Hey, I'm Jim from Digital Anarchy, and in this tutorial we're going to take a look at an extreme example of slow motion flicker. And we're going to use Flicker Free plugin from Digital Anarchy to fix it. And we're doing that in Premiere, of course. And so the first step is to go to your video effects and open up Digital Anarchy and then apply Flicker Free. And I've already done that, so that's going to show up in the effects control window. And by default, none of the presets work for this footage, so we're going to go through the process of figuring out what settings do work. And so generally you want to start with the rolling bands, which is the default preset. And we can see that if I just apply this as is, it doesn't do a great job of deflickering the video. And so when you have a situation like this where the presets don't work, the first step is to use rolling bands, but turn off detect motion. And this will give you a good idea of whether the flicker is solvable at all. And in this case, you can see that the flicker is removed. It's been replaced by a whole bunch of blurring. That's not good either. But at least we know the flickering can be removed, and now the trick is to deal with the blurring. And so there's two ways of doing that. One with detect motion, which we've already seen doesn't work, and then the other with motion compensation. So if I turn this on, you can see that now it's done a great job of deflickering the video and keeping it very sharp. You're not getting any of the ghosting or blurring that you had with motion compensation off. And so motion compensation can be an incredibly critical tool for dealing with fast-moving objects like football or players. And also, one of the other things that's important is the lower the time radius, the better. It's going to render faster, you're going to have less artifacts. And so if we look at the original footage here, the flicker is happening every other frame. And so it's a very fast flicker. I mean, it's very extreme as well, but it's also very fast. And so we can probably get away with a lower time radius. So if we set this to 3, the football actually gets a little bit sharper and the flicker is still gone. And so again, with that time radius set to a lower value, it's going to render faster, it's going to be a little bit sharper, and it's going to be less likely to have any weird artifacts. And so it's done a great job on this footage. But let's take a look at something that is a little bit different. So this footage, again, flicker free is applied to it. Let's turn it off. And if we look at this, you can see that there's a very kind of slow pulsing type of flicker. And this flicker is happening over, 10, 20 frames. And so we're going to need a longer or a higher time radius value to analyze that flicker and remove it. So let's turn flicker free back on. If I switch back to the rolling bands default, it's a pretty good job. The flicker is definitely reduced, but you can still see some of that pulsing. So let's try a higher value like 16, and that does the trick. The flicker is almost completely removed and it looks great. But 16 is a high value for time radius. The max is 19. So what if we can use a lower time radius but use time step? And so in this case we're going to set time step to 2, and what that's going to do is use every other frame. So it's still the same amount of time distance as 16 frames, but instead of every single frame as we would with a time radius of 16, we're now doing every other frame. And if I play that back, you can see it's done an equally good job of removing the flicker, and we didn't actually need to have 16 individual frames. When you have it set to say 16, it's looking at 16 frames before the time head and 16 frames after to figure out what the correct luminance of the frame should be. And so that can really slow things down. And so if you can have a lower value, that's always better. It's going to render faster, less chance of artifacts, so it's just always better to have a lower time radius. All right, so that's how to deflicker video in Premiere Pro with Flicker Free. Just wanted to go over how to deflicker slow motion footage. And of course, there are other intro tutorials on digitalanarchy.com that will do a deeper dive into what all these parameters do. And also, if you have footage that you're having trouble deflickering, you can always send us a few seconds of it, and we will be happy to recommend some flicker-free settings for you. You can always just reach out at sales@digitalanarchy.com. Anyways, thanks for joining me, and hope this was helpful.